Hello everyone! Welcome to my first Q&A Paint With Me video. I wanted to branch out into other platforms and connect with you guys more. So, sit down, get comfortable, maybe paint with me, and let's talk. So over on my Twitter and Instagram, I had you guys send me questions that I would then answer for this video. So let's get started. Who are your favorite watercolor artists? I have this separated in historical and modern. Historical being artists that have passed away, and modern being ones that are still making art today. Historical are John Singer Sargent, Giuseppe Signorini, Sergio Topi, and 𝕤𝕒𝕥𝕣𝕚𝕒. Modern artists are Victor Ambrus, Roseanne Grosjean, and Natasha Ilincic. What do you line your watercolor art with? I use a Micron 01 Sepia pen. Was there ever a point when you seriously thought about quitting art? Not really. I've always enjoyed art and art making. I had been drawing since a very young age and even went to school of the arts since the 4th grade. It was sort of set in stone for me at an early age and I never once complained, and I just really enjoyed it every step of the way. I have seriously thought about quitting college though, but that feeling at the start of the second semester of my final year, so it wasn't really a viable option. A favorite piece you really love, either yours or from another artist, and tell us about it. Oh boy, this is a long one. My favorite piece that isn't one the whole internet knows of, like some Landecker or Lawrence 𝕤𝕒𝕤𝕚𝕤𝕚 piece, is most well known as Found by Walter Hunt. I first came across this piece in my hometown's vintage store. It was a print of this painting, framed. Paintings in vintage stores don't usually catch my eye and keep me interested, so I found this particular painting incredibly intriguing for that very reason. I couldn't afford the one in the store, so I went home, and a few weeks later I still couldn't get it out of my head, so I found it online by searching keywords and ordered a New Age print. It eventually comes and I frame it in my childhood bedroom. That was 4 years ago, so earlier this month I decided to finally break the mystery and do some research on it. That's how I found out that this painting actually has 5 different names and 3 possible artists associated with it. It was a very popular lithograph print of a painting that was sold all throughout from 1920 to 1980, so there's prints of it everywhere. And well, to save everyone's time, I'll leave the history of the painting and its details for another video if that is something some of you are interested in. What is your favorite time period and location, and why? So I have so many. I like to jump around and have phases, whatever I'm feeling. But I think the one that makes me keep coming back, and I may have a bias, is 18th century or 4th century South Slavic Balkan areas. I think the history is incredibly rich and so full of beauty and sadness that I think you could research those areas for your entire life and you'd still find something new to learn. Which character do you connect with the most and why? I'm assuming you're asking for one of my characters. And while they all have their own reasons as to why I connect with them, whether it's because I put my own personality into theirs or I wish I had theirs, but I think when I boil it down, it's honestly 𝕤𝕒𝕥𝕣𝕚𝕚, the one I'm painting here. He is my comfort character. I made him to represent my life, and he helps me explore my life and what it may have been if my parents had stayed in 𝕤𝕏. Obviously, I'm not part Romani or a boy, but those aspects are to make him more of an individual. How do you choose your light source and color palette? Oh boy. My go-to light source is from the left of the figure when I do basic rendering, but when it goes further than that, it's usually whatever feeling I want the piece to have. I usually roughly map it out before I go in for it, and as for color palette, I make it up as I go. Which isn't a good thing. I'm the worst person when it comes to planning a piece, if it wasn't obvious from this answer. But that being said, I do try to keep it as simple as possible. I like the 5 colors minimum rule when it is necessary or when it applies. So with my watercolor paintings, I try not to use as many tubes of paint as possible, and I will mix colors together so that it stays within the same color range, so it's not as much of a headache to look at. ultimate dream art project. In the scenario you have endless resources, the sky's the limit. Honestly, the project I'm working on right now is my dream project, walking the Danube, my senior thesis and now my passion project. I can only imagine it'll go as far as my own little concept art book of it, but if I had the chance to make it go further, I'd want to have it filmed in 𝕤𝕒 or Serbia with Serbian actors and Bojana Petrovic working on the music for the film. That's a long story short, but that would be the dream. Fave drawing you've done? Good question. I think the piece I keep going back to when I think about my proudest piece is the one of Ljuban lounging on the couch and the light is hitting just his face and catching parts of the smoke of his cigarette. That was my true first piece that utilized serious lighting, and to have challenged myself so much with not only incorporating interesting lighting, but the way it affected the smoke as well. I don't know, I'm just very happy with the outcome. Do you prefer digital or traditional? I think both have their extreme positives and negatives. I can't really choose one over the other. I love digital for its convenience and practicality, how fast I'm able to put out a fully rendered piece, and longevity, but traditional for its visible craftsmanship, being able to physically hold the piece and see the strokes. Where the hand worked. I get a different feeling of pride with my traditional work than I do with my digital work. What was the first piece you did in your earlier work that you're still proud of? I could go far back for this considering how long I've been making art, but I'll stick within my college years. My recent earliest piece is the one of my cowboy characters. This was the first piece I made with a full interactive background that was created by my own accord and not for a class project, and it really changed the game for me, much like that Ljuban piece where I experimented with intentional lighting. This one, I experimented with an intentional background. What are some of the most memorable comments or critiques you've gotten on your work, and why? Is there any piece of art advice that's always stuck with you or that you really think make a difference in your work? The most world-shaking critique I've ever gotten was when I presented an illustration to my class, and one of my peers made a comment on how there was no lighting in my piece. It was completely flat and made the piece uncanny. The professor then said it was as if the scene was caught on a perfectly cloudy day and there are no shadows. That really stuck with me and made me focus on improving upon my lighting skills. An art advice I received that also changed the way I made art was when my freshman professor told me to stop rendering my digital work like a painting. It wasn't working for me, and he suggested I try cel shading instead, since my line art was so precise. In an instant, I changed my former painterly style, which I thought was what I wanted in my work, to a more illustrative cel shading style, and it transformed my art for the best. What's your favorite part of the art process, and what art-related field do you think you'd be in if you weren't in concept art or art history? I love the lining process and adding highlights. The lining process is so therapeutic and really puts me in a meditative state. And the highlights is what really brings the figures to life, I think. Both are magical parts of the process for me. I think I'd be a costume designer. My love for history and character design would translate incredibly well, I think. How did you get to the point you're at with drawing hair? The life and volume you put into it is my favorite thing about your art. Honestly, just practice and drawing it over and over again. If you look at the way I drew hair a year or two ago, you'll see it wasn't as detailed as it is now. And that's only because I kept drawing, and over time it improved and became what it is today. I also look at my own hair a lot, and you can probably tell the hair I draw looks a lot like the hair I have in my head. You are your own best reference. Regarding your character designs, I really love how much passion you put into researching the cultures and history that they're based off of. What's your studying process? What media do you lean towards first for research, like books, sites, videos, and etc.? First, thank you. My base bare-bone research is Wikipedia, honestly, as silly as that sounds, but that isn't my final step. I use Wikipedia to start the foundation of my knowledge so I know roughly what I'm looking for moving forward. I'm a slow reader, so I typically find online books and find keywords to my topic and read small paragraphs. I try to find peer-reviewed or scholarly articles in journals so I know for a fact I'm gaining accurate information. as well as a historically confirmed photographs or drawings for clothing references. I keep an eye out for trusty documentaries. History Channel documentaries I tend to stay away from because they're notorious for chopping up and glorifying information for the sake of entertainment. Instead, I look for documentaries made or arranged by certified historians or archaeologists who actually study the field I'm researching. So I hope that helps answer your question. It's a lot of dedication researching history and culture because what's most important to me is representing that group of people to the best of my abilities. It's only what I would want if someone were to draw a Serbian character. I would want them to depict them as accurately and as respectfully as possible. Supplies you use most often, like watercolor, paper, programs, tools, etc. And what size or DPI you usually work at. I love and stand by Staedtler lead holders with HB lead and Canson Mixed Media sketchbook. It is my best friend, forever and always. I always work at 300 DPI, and the size of the canvas is usually dependent on the composition of the piece, but usually it's 11 by 17, which I know is an odd size, but it has worked the best for me so far. 300 DPI is the bare minimum for digital art. If I printed my stuff more for comics or posters, I'd be working on 600 DPI with a better computer. But 300 DPI works just fine for me, and I think that's what I recommend for every digital artist that isn't printing their work. Do you have any artists from the region of ex-Yugoslavia that you really like? Historical: Paja Jovanović, Vlaho Bukovac, Mato Medović, Tomislav Krizman. Modern: Helen Janicic and Natasha Ilinčić. What brand of watercolor do you use? I use a mix. Daniel Smith mostly, and Winsor Newton, both professional and Cotman paints. Do you want to move to Serbia in the future? To live there? My thoughts and plans will always change, but right now my dream is to live in the mountains on my grandpa's farm in retirement where I'll paint the fields and animals. I don't think moving there at a young age would be a very smart move for me, considering I'd live with my family in Banja Luka, which is a part of ex-Yugo that isn't very art-forward thinking. What is your favorite part to paint? Faces, clothes, plants, skies, etc. I love rendering skin. It's the easiest to create undertones for, and it's the most flexible part of the piece for me. How do you come up with your compositions? Reference or more trial and error? I feel that I'm lucky in the sense that I have an almost natural eye for composition. I've studied, broke down, and looked at so much art history in my life that I think I just soaked in a lot of what makes a successful composition. But regardless, I tend to examine my work at the end of a sketch to really make sure it's flowing right and asking friends for advice. I'll primarily look at the line of action and see how the eye naturally moves throughout the piece, because that's what matters the most to me. Keeps the art alive and moving if it's guiding your eyes for you, whether you realize it or not. Da li možeš dati neki svoje savjete ljudima koji tek počinju da radi vodenim bojama od početnika? Kažem ovo svaki put kada primim ovo pitanje. Vodenim bojama su jako oprašta. Ako progrešite, boju je lako izvaditi sa vodom i peškirom. Nemojte biti tužni usred slike ako ne izgleda dobro, jer vodenim bojama su notorna po svojoj ružnoj faze. Samo nastavite slikate. How do you balance work and play? I almost combine the two. Before quarantine, I would go to coffee shops on my own or with friends and just draw and listen to chatter around me or from my friend. I try not to treat art like a chore, but instead like a treat. Not just with my personal art, but with work art too. I'd work on commissions or projects at coffee shops and draw for hours. I used to go every day and work, so I didn't really have to think about whether or not I allowed myself to go out and have fun with friends because I did or didn't make enough progress on a project. Favorite differences between Balkan and Western culture. Balkan culture has a lot of love and respect for downtime or having a good time with friends. Cafes, at least where my family's from, is only used to have a drink with friends. Rarely do you see people studying or working with their drinks. Whereas in America, it's grinding 24/7, and I feel like we don't spend a lot of time in the moment. I like how Americans mind their own business. Serbians tend to talk about you and stare right in front of you. It took a while for me to get used to that kind of social change when I visited recently. I also really like how generous people are with their friends in 𝕤𝕤. Your home is their home. You buy each other drinks, no ifs, ands, or buts, with no paybacks. Just pay for the next round, no problem. My cousin's husband said Americans have money because they're stingy with it, that they won't pay for their friends' drinks or meals, if that tells you anything about the culture over there. Have you settled on a process you enjoy watercolor-wise? If not, where do you want to take it, and what changes do you want to make? Yes and no. Considering I just started painting watercolor seriously, I can imagine I have a long way to go. I like adding the colorful washes that help map out the shadows and highlights and rough color patches. It helps create more dynamic skin and clothes colors. But I hope to get better at laying darker washes to really map out lighting. Incorporating legitimate lighting throughout my entire watercolor painting is my current goal as I keep working. So it seems like we've reached the end of our video. Thank you for listening and watching, and if you sat and worked on a piece with me, thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope everyone appreciated this video. Now, if you're still around and you want to see more, please consider checking out my Patreon, where for $5 a month you can see speed paints from the past year, including the one you just saw, but not chopped up and not slow. With that, you could also see this painting's sister piece, which hasn't been uploaded to YouTube and is only on my Patreon. Have a good one!